Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me for another episode of True Crime Jesus. Remember 4 years ago when the Delphi murders had just happened? Only weeks after the murders of Liberty German and Abigail Williams, I remember seeing headlines like this one. DNA breakthrough. Cops fast-track DNA testing in Delphi murders. It's now been 4 years, and nothing ever became of this. Why? Do they have Bridge Guy's DNA, or don't they? And if they have his DNA, what are they waiting for? This episode, I will be discussing a very controversial investigative technique called a DNA sweep, or DNA dragnet, or less commonly referred to as blooding. We will also discuss available technology and how DNA testing could cheaply and realistically be done in the case of the Delphi murders. DNA sweeps are typically carried out in cases in which police have recovered DNA evidence from an unknown perpetrator, but have no match to that DNA in their system, such as in the case of the Delphi murders. Law enforcement has told the media numerous times that DNA was recovered, and there is no match to that DNA in their system. Finding a person's DNA doesn't necessarily prove that the person was present at the crime scene. Law enforcement must prove that the suspect actually committed the murders. If the only evidence found at the crime scene is DNA, and the suspect is local, his story could be that he was there the same week or a month before, either hiking, hunting, or fishing. The killer also could have planted an object with someone else's DNA on it in order to deflect suspicion away from himself. These DNA dragnets are carried out in cases in which police only have a vague description of the perpetrator and must proceed without suspecting a specific person. Most dragnets are conducted in order to obtain samples from people who either lived or worked near the crime scene, focusing on those who had the opportunity to commit the crime. Police need probable cause for a search warrant to force a person to give their DNA sample. It's much easier to collect their DNA sample through voluntary consent. Failing to consent to provide their DNA will direct the suspicion of the police and lead them to focus upon that individual, which is the ultimate purpose behind a dragnet. Once consent is obtained, the sample is tested to reveal the individual's DNA profile. The human genome remains substantially the same between every person, but within each person's chromosomes live variations and mutations that are unique to each individual. By testing a sample and isolating these areas of variations, or polymorphisms, a scientist can compare these areas of variations with the areas of variation in another sample. If the two samples carry the same polymorphisms, a scientist can calculate the probability that the samples came from the same person based on how frequently those polymorphisms occur compared to the general population. Superintendent Carter has always maintained that Bridge Guy is from the Delphi area and visits or has worked there. The population of Delphi for the year 2020 was roughly 3,000 people. Roughly 50% of those 3,000 residents are female and can be excluded right off the top. This leaves the remaining 1,500 Delphi residents that are men. We are looking for a target group of men between the ages of 18 to 40 years old out of a lifespan of approximately 80 years. If the suspect is between the ages of 18 to 40, which leaves an age range of 22 possible years, 22 out of 80 is approximately equal to a quarter. If a quarter of the male population of Delphi submitted a sample, this would equal roughly 375 men. The demographics of Delphi, Indiana are 90% white and 10% other ethnic background. Since we know Bridge Guy is a white male and 90% of the 375 remaining males are white, when we eliminate the other ethnicities, that leaves 337 white males. Of these 337 white males, we can eliminate any of them that don't fit the general description of Bridge Guy. Some will be physically disabled, too thin, or too obese, too tall or too short, or they could have already volunteered a DNA sample. This would eliminate even more suspects, leaving perhaps 300 men as a rough estimate. These remaining 300 men could be interviewed and cleared by investigating their movements of February 13th, 2017. These remaining men could also be asked to take polygraph tests, to submit audio-voice comparison samples, fingerprints, and even DNA. The results of all DNA samples would be immediately destroyed once it is seen not to match. Anyone refusing to cooperate would become a person of interest. Police could then announce that they are going to spread an even wider net and repeat the same process on populations surrounding Delphi. Then we sit back and wait to see who panics. The killer will reveal himself through this process. I know what you're thinking. True crime Jesus. Wouldn't a DNA sweep be too expensive and take far too long? What if I was to tell you that it wouldn't? DNA technology has advanced to such a degree that it is now possible to obtain a full forensic DNA profile cheaply and in as little as 90 minutes. Thermo Fisher Scientific sells this easy-to-use, fully automated, sample-to-answer genetic analyzer that will produce a high-quality DNA profile in only 90 minutes. The FBI has even approved profiles obtained from this system for use in their CODIS database. I recently found a used one on eBay for only $1,500. Every minute that bridge guy remains free is more time for our children to become a victim. The first reported DNA dragnet occurred in the English village of Narborough in 1986. In an attempt to solve the rape and murder of 2 teenage girls, police sought voluntary blood samples from 4,500 men between the ages of 17 and 34. The men in the village cooperated, largely because of social pressure exerted by the small community and the desire of most of the village's citizens to protect the community's young women. The DNA samples collected from men in the village, however, were not ultimately responsible for the apprehension of the perpetrator of the crimes. When a local man, Colin Pitchfork, attempted to secretly have one of his co-workers provide a DNA sample for him, law enforcement suspicions were raised, and eventually Pitchfork was charged with the crimes. Since this first DNA sweep in 1986, the practice has become commonplace in England. The results of dragnets conducted in England have been impressive. The public is far less resistant to the practice in comparison to the American public. This could be due to its success. The Forensic Science Service of England and Wales has carried out 292 dragnets since 1995. Of those 292 dragnets, 61, or 20%, produced significant matches that pushed investigations toward a specific individual and often led to the conviction of that individual. Following England's seeming success with DNA dragnets, the practice spread to other countries such as France and Germany. Germany was the site of the largest DNA dragnet to date. In 1998, Nicky Verstappen, an 11-year-old boy, disappeared in the middle of the night from a Dutch summer camp near the German border. A day later, his deceased body was found near the campsite. Authorities said Nicky had been sexually abused before he was murdered. A local mechanic, Jos Breck, had been spotted near the scene of the crime. Breck was interviewed as a witness by police, but was thought to be an innocent passerby. The German DNA dragnet led to the testing of nearly 16,400 people before Breck was identified as the perpetrator of the rape and murder. There have been 18 recorded DNA sweeps in the U.S., but they were far from successful. These were cases of rape, murder, or both. The first dragnet to take place in the U.S. occurred in 1990 in San Diego, when police tested more than 800 African American men in an attempt to identify the person who stabbed 6 people to death in their homes. Since then, DNA dragnets have become increasingly popular in the U.S., with 18 occurring since 1990, 4 alone in 2004. Unfortunately, the success rate of these dragnets hasn't been good. The only comprehensive study done on this topic found that only 1 of the 18 DNA dragnets performed thus far in the United States had produced a viable suspect. 10 of the 18 cases that were investigated through the use of a DNA dragnet were ultimately solved by other means, and 4 remain unsolved. 10-year-old Holly Jones disappeared while walking home from a friend's house in Toronto, Canada in May 2013. Holly's body parts were later found in bags floating in Lake Ontario. Police canvassed about 300 homes in her neighborhood and asked every man in them to provide DNA. Michael Briere refused to provide a DNA sample and was arrested after police got his DNA from a pop can he threw in a public garbage bin. Briere confessed to police that he sexually assaulted and strangled Holly Jones before dismembering her body. Briere later pled guilty to first-degree murder. That's all the time we have for this episode, my dear friends. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me. Please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Share this video with your friends, your neighbors, your therapists, and even that weird man that always stares at you on the bus. This episode would not have been possible without the nutrition and sustenance that True Crime Jesus receives from his favorite heavenly treat, Ben & Jerry's Chocolate Therapy Ice Cream. Chocolate Therapy Ice Cream is a magnificent concoction of chocolate ice cream, chocolate cookies, and delicious swirls of chocolate pudding. Eating this ice cream will help you solve crime, just like True Crime Jesus. Some of the greatest minds in true crime owe their success to Ben & Jerry's Chocolate Therapy Ice Cream. These include cold case investigator Paul Holes, Sheriff David Reichert from the Green River Task Force, and that creepy host of Unsolved Mysteries, Robert Stack.
The idea of a creature larger than a gorilla with an odor like a skunk might seem far-fetched.
Even research chemist Lionel Dahmer enjoys a good tub of chocolate therapy.
There really wasn't, if I had known about the roadkill, that would have been a red flag. I would have done something immediately.
So until we meet again, my dear friends, this is True Crime Jesus, signing off.